You know that moment when everything seems connected, but no one explains how? That's right. While the world spins at full speed, decisions about wars, sanctions, alliances, and agreements are being made behind closed doors, and most people have no idea what's at stake. Think understanding geopolitics is something for university professors or suit-and-tie analysts? Big mistake. Geopolitical theory is the source code of reality, and once you learn to decode it, you'll never watch the news the same way again. Let's be honest. You've been misled without even realizing it. Yes, misled. They called it a trade conflict when it was really a territorial dispute. They sold you international cooperation while hiding economic domination. And you bought it. Because no one ever told you how power is truly structured. But relax. This game has changed. Today, understanding the world's backstage isn't just possible. It's essential. And the best part? You don't need to be a diplomat or a defense expert. All you need is the right content. So if you're ready to stop being a spectator and start thinking like a strategist, you've come to the right place. This content will show you, step by step, how to think geopolitically. We'll decode the real interests behind global conflicts, crises, and alliances, based on reliable research sources, solid concepts, and real-world examples. But be warned, after this, there's no going back to seeing the world the old way.
When someone hears the word geopolitics, it's common to picture something distant, reserved for diplomats or generals. But the truth is, the formal definition of geopolitics has much more to do with your daily life than it seems. It's the study of power relations between territories, taking into account geographic, economic, historical, and cultural factors. It's as if the planet were a chessboard, and countries were pieces moving not only out of interest, but also due to the constraints of terrain, climate, resources, and position. That's why some nations get involved in wars, trade disputes, or strategic alliances that, at first glance, seem senseless. A great way to understand this definition is to think about Russia and its obsession with maintaining influence over Ukraine. It's not just about history or national identity, but also about access to the Black Sea, control of borders, and NATO's proximity. Once you understand this kind of analysis, everything starts to make sense, and you begin to see the world with new eyes. This critical lens starts to take shape when you dive into reliable research sources, such as the works of Friedrich Ratzel, Halford Mackinder, and Nicholas Spykman, who are considered foundational theorists of modern geopolitics. If your curiosity has been sparked, here's a practical tip. Start with the book, Geopolitics, The World in Conflict, by Demetrio Magnoli. It's both accessible and profound. Then, go deeper with Politics Among Nations, by Hans Morgenthau. These readings will help you internalize this thematic expertise. And before you know it, you'll be watching the news like a strategist instead of a spectator. Because ultimately, understanding geopolitics means uncovering the backstage of power. And like any good story, the next chapter always comes packed with plot twists. Few people know this, but geopolitics has its own fathers, mothers, and godfathers. And no, they weren't just generals or diplomats. The foundational theorists who shaped geopolitical thinking came from very specific contexts, trying to explain why some nations rise and dominate while others shrink and vanish. Friedrich Ratzel, for example, was one of the first to see the state as a living organism that needed to breathe territory. This explained why empires expanded. Halford Mackinder, on the other hand, offered a nearly prophetic vision when he stated that whoever controls the heartland, Eurasia's core, controls the world. These ideas aren't just historical curiosities. They continue to shape how leaders make strategic decisions today. Take China's growing presence in Africa or the renewed US focus on NATO and the Indo-Pacific. These are deeply influenced by those early visions. Understanding who laid the foundations also means understanding the methodological principles behind the most important power moves today. It's like having a map of the world's true power structures. To dive deeper into this world, read books like Geopolitics, A Very Short Introduction by Klaus Dodds, or explore the work of Yves Lacoste, who revived geopolitics from the academic coma it fell into in the 80s and 90s. Many still treat geopolitics like dusty old theory, but the truth is, it's constantly evolving. And now that you know who planted the first seeds, maybe it's time to explore the conditions that define true geopolitics. These days, people label everything as geopolitics. Gasoline prices go up. Geopolitics. Two presidents arguing on X, formerly Twitter. Geopolitics. But hold on, there are specific conditions for something to actually qualify as geopolitics. The main one is its direct link to territory and power. If it doesn't affect the control, influence, or dispute over physical or symbolic space, then it's not geopolitics. It's just international gossip dressed up as serious analysis. Learning to filter this is what separates the curious from the strategist. Want a real example? When France bans TikTok in schools, it's more about internal politics and cultural values than geopolitics. But when the US restricts AI chips to China, that's geopolitics in full swing, a move that impacts power, technological sovereignty, and global influence. It ties directly to the four pillars of power: territory, resources, population, and projection capacity. Every serious geopolitical analysis, sooner or later, revolves around these elements. To build this critical lens, ask yourself, does this involve control over space, power between nations, or strategic influence networks? If the answer is no, you're likely just reading spin. To sharpen this view, follow sources like The Diplomat, Foreign Affairs, or reports from the International Crisis Group. And since we're talking about sharpening perception, there's one tool few people value, but every strategist swears by: maps. Yes, maps hold more truth than most headlines. Every power structure in the world, from diplomacy to war, rests on four fundamental columns. Those who master these four pillars of power are always a step ahead in the geopolitical game. They are territory, population, resources, and projection capacity. Sounds simple, right? But these elements are the gears behind every strategic decision. Think of China. Vast territory, massive population, enormous resources, and a navy that grows year after year. A textbook case of how these pillars align. Now compare that with Germany. Despite its economic power and diplomatic clout, it has limited territory, an aging population, and a heavy energy dependence. That doesn't mean Germany is out of the game. It just plays differently, relying more on alliances and political influence. Understanding these pillars is like having a strategic map of world power. It's like learning to read the field before stepping into the match. Without it, you're playing blind. To see these pillars clearly, start looking at maps like living tools. Every line, every color, every border tells a story of power. Maps aren't neutral. They show who controls what and who's fighting for space. That's why maps are essential to any real geopolitical analysis. And, as any good strategist knows, the game only truly begins when you understand the board. When we look at a map, it's easy to assume it's just a neutral drawing. But don't be fooled. Maps are weapons of power. They don't just display territory, they shape narratives, define priorities, and often create illusions. The importance of maps in geopolitics goes far beyond physical geography. They reveal hidden interests. Whoever controls how the world is represented also controls how it's perceived. And perception, in international politics, is everything. Need a practical example? Look at how Jerusalem appears on different maps. Depending on the country producing the map, it may be shown as Israel's capital or as a disputed territory. Completely changes the narrative. Or consider China's maps of the South China Sea, which depict it almost like a domestic lake, ignoring disputes with Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. In other words, maps are never just maps. They're propaganda tools, symbols of influence and dominance. Learning to read them properly is key to developing serious thematic expertise. Want to develop this strategic eye? Try this. Take 2 maps of the same region from different countries and compare them. Then check reliable research sources like the Brazilian Military Geographic Institute, National Geographic, or the International Crisis Group. The differences will jump out at you. Because in the end, what a map hides is just as important as what it reveals. And that brings us to something deeper. How can we turn this visual reading into a consistent method of geopolitical analysis? Thinking geopolitically isn't about repeating headlines with big words. It's not about following trends or feeding conspiracy theories that pretend to be analysis. It requires method, discipline. The methodological foundations of geopolitics go way beyond knowing where each country is. It's about crossing historical, economic, cultural, and military data to understand the real why behind global power plays. It's like building a puzzle with pieces from books, maps, speeches, and hard numbers. To do it right, you need curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism. A true strategist questions everything: who's speaking, why, and what interest lies beneath. They compare sources, track different ideological viewpoints, and draw conclusions carefully. Great thinkers to start with include John Mearsheimer, Robert Kaplan, and Samuel Huntington, each with their own lens, all with depth. These are the people who help shape a thematic expertise with critical vision. Want to apply this to your daily life? Start by analyzing world events using an investigative script. Who benefits? Who loses? What's the historical context? Why here and why now? You'll be miles ahead of people reacting to headlines. And once you learn this way of thinking, it helps with everything, from global crises to national politics. But to truly sharpen your strategic lens, it's worth asking, why was geopolitics ever left out of the conversation to begin with? After World War II, geopolitics was pushed into the academic basement. It became associated with imperialism, authoritarian regimes, and expansionist ideologies. To some extent, fairly so, terms like Lebensraum had poisoned the field. But by rejecting it entirely, the world also lost a crucial analytical tool. The post-war crisis of geopolitics was more ideological than methodological. In throwing out the toxic misuse, the baby went out with the bathwater. Thankfully, the tide shifted. In the 1970s, and more intensely in the following decades, geopolitics re-entered the stage, largely thanks to thinkers like Yves Lacoste. He brought a sharper, more democratic lens and famously said, "Geography is first and foremost used to wage war." He was right. The revival of the concept included new layers of analysis, not just tanks and borders, but also trade routes, energy networks, digital infrastructure, and psychological influence. Same geopolitics, new tools. This wasn't just an academic comeback, it reshaped global strategy. Terrorism, the rise of China, hybrid conflicts, they all required updated geopolitical thinking. Those clinging to outdated models were left behind, and even today, some still treat geopolitics as a vague label. That's because its devaluation in the 1990s left deep marks. But in a world of constant tension, understanding power, territory, and influence has never been more crucial. The 1990s were marked by a kind of naive optimism. The Soviet Union collapsed, globalization surged, and the US reigned supreme. Many believed geopolitical conflicts were a thing of the past. It was the age of free markets and liberal democracy, the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama put it. In this environment, geopolitics seemed outdated. Just sign trade deals, open markets, and all would be well. But reality had other plans. That era saw a sharp devaluation of geopolitics. But the world doesn't follow wishful thinking. While universities ignored geopolitics, conflicts exploded in the Balkans, the Middle East, and Africa. China quietly grew, Russia restructured, and the US even as the sole superpower, had to hustle to maintain control. Analysts who understood the four pillars of power saw the calm as temporary. Geopolitics was still breathing, just waiting for the next storm. That storm came on September 11th. Suddenly, it was obvious. Ignoring territorial and ideological power games was costly. The attacks, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, China's rise, all demanded a return to geopolitical analysis. Interest in thematic expertise surged. Schools, think tanks, and the public rediscovered the value of reliable research sources. And now, with the world in permanent flux, the real question is, who's actually prepared to navigate this new global chessboard? If the world is a geopolitical chessboard, South America is that corner everyone underestimates, until a major move shakes the game. With vast natural resources, strategic location, and ongoing internal disputes, the region plays a critical role in 21st century geopolitics. It holds the world's largest tropical forest, massive lithium reserves, and key access to both the Atlantic and Pacific. Add to that the political diversity and instability, and you've got a fascinating, volatile field of power. Here, state protagonism takes unique forms. Some countries pursue regional leadership through diplomacy and economic blocs, like Brazil with Mercosur. Others swing between isolation and realignment. All, to some degree, are targets of global power interests, not just from the US and the EU, but increasingly from China and Russia, who use investment and strategic agreements to gain influence. To understand this region's role, you have to look deeper. Bioceanic corridors, quiet military bases, infrastructure megaprojects, multilateral forums. These reveal the true geopolitical interests at play. The mistake is thinking South America is just an appendix to the real centers of power. In reality, it's an evolving theater of global competition. And from this dynamic soil, new voices, perspectives, and emerging schools of thought are rising, ready to challenge long-standing narratives. For a long time, geopolitical debates were dominated by Euro-American elites. That's changing. Today, emerging schools of thought are popping up across the globe, from the Middle East to Africa, Asia to Latin America, offering fresh lenses to understand global power. These new voices don't just shift accents in the conversation. They ask different questions, challenge old frameworks, and propose analysis grounded in local realities. They're redefining the formal definition of geopolitics. African analysts are shaping how we view regional conflict. Latin American thinkers critique foreign intervention and highlight the value of self-determination. These schools ask, what really counts as power? Who defines threats? Where is influence truly built? Behind these questions is a push to develop more democratic and grounded methodological foundations, ones that reflect people who live geopolitics daily, not just theorize about it. And it's not just happening in universities. It's on podcasts, YouTube channels, newsletters, grassroots groups. This is a thematic expertise that's accessible, digital, and deeply engaged. The new geopolitical thinker isn't just a PhD holder. They're also journalists, creators, informed citizens. And with everything being redefined, one key question remains. Shouldn't geopolitics finally be seen as a structural science, not just occasional commentary? Now tell me, after all this, can you still watch the news like it's just another story? Of course not. You've just accessed a layer of the world that few people ever see. And that changes everything. But understanding geopolitical theory isn't just about knowing more. It's about having an edge to analyze, decide, invest, vote, and form your opinions. Because those who understand the board play better, and those who play better don't settle for being pieces. They become strategists. So, what will you do with this knowledge? Let it fade away or apply it to your daily life? What kind of reading will you prioritize? Which sources will you start following? Have you ever thought about mapping your own sphere of influence? Can you imagine explaining an international conflict more clearly than some TV commentators? Well, that's within your reach, and it all starts with one step: practice and consistency. If this content made sense to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Around here, every video is a key to unlock doors most people don't even know exist. Let's keep going on this journey together. The world won't stop, but you can absolutely learn to anticipate its next moves.